Welcome back. Israel is expected to launch a ground offensive on the Gaza Strip any day now in retaliation to Hamas terrorists. The Biden administration relaxed sanctions on Iran, enabling its brutal regime to make at least $112 billion in oil sales, according to the U.S. Energy Department, with Tehran increasing its oil production to 3 million barrels a day in August from 2.6 million in April. Iran's Ayatollah Khomeini has directed the oil revenue toward funding his nuclear program and terrorist proxies in the region, instead of on its people, many of whom now live below the poverty line. Joining me right now with more is His Royal Highness, the exiled Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, who this past spring traveled to Israel and met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Crown Prince, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Can you assess the most recent threat from Iran? Is warning that if Israel goes ahead with this ground assault, Israel will face a quote-unquote earthquake?
First of all, let's understand why we are at the stage that we are now facing. From the get-go, this regime was not of a mindset of prosperity and development. It was rather in a mindset of expansionism and exporting an ideology at the expense of its own citizenry. That means utilizing every resource at its hand to continue repression at home and a campaign of terror and this instability abroad as a means to their ends. So everything you see as a consequence of that is the result or the symptoms of this cancer that started in Tehran to begin with. And obviously, as the regime sees a weakness and is, as a result, bolder in pushing the envelope even further, it is now testing the resolve, not just of Israel, but the rest of the world as to how far they can push it in order to obtain whatever it is in their mind. It certainly is not peace. It is certainly not stability. They were severely threatened by the idea and prospect of a Saudi-Israeli peace relation in the context of the Abraham Accords, and all that you can call it at the very least sabotage, but at the very worst, trying to again create foment terror and instability.
What do you believe the proper response from the United States should be right now?
Well, first and foremost, actually implement the sanctions that have been called for. We have forgotten about maximum pressure. I think the time has come to not only freeze the assets that were supposed to be unfrozen, because we all know that the Iranians now have additional money that they are going to, of course, spend on this campaign of terror via their proxies, but most importantly, increase even more the sanctions. One of the chief operatives behind all these proxies happens to be the IRGC. And we're still questioning why Europe, for instance, America's allies, have not actually put the IRGC on the terrorist list. This is a way to cripple the regime as opposed to, in fact, empower it. And furthermore, and the ultimate solution, and this is something I've been arguing for years, you have today the biggest war going on between the Iranian people and this regime, a fight for liberation, a fight for freedom. And why is that important? Because unlike this regime, which celebrates martyrdom, which lacks terror, we as a nation espouse the very same values of liberty and human rights as you would in America or France or in Sweden. And we are your natural allies, but we have been totally forgotten in this. If you want to solve and cure the cancer, you have to take the eye of the octopus out and not just fight the tentacles. Yeah. The solution ultimately is Tehran and regime change.
I understand that, but what about these other regional groups? You just heard former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo talk about how close Iran is to having enrichment for a nuclear weapon. We also heard Michael McCall, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, talk about Hezbollah currently having 100,000 rockets. Can you assess the strength of Hezbollah?
Well, again, reason more to ultimately take the eye of the octopus out, because the funding, the support, the strategic partnership that Iran has with a couple of very important blocks of power, meaning China and Russia, in the balance, will determine the outcome of what we see in the Middle East today. So regardless of what Tehran is trying to do vis-a-vis its proxies, or perhaps even trying to challenge and push further for opening a second front to this conflict, we'll have to see how they will respond to today's campaign of Israel defending itself and retaliating towards this act, but also what the rest of the region and the world will respond like. Look, there is terrorism going on right now. It's a war of terror, and everybody in the world of sane mind understand that as long as you have these elements in play, we will never see a peaceful region and stability. This is a problem that afflicts all. It's not just an Israeli problem. It's not just an Iranian problem. It's a regional and ultimately international problem. There's no other way to look at this. So it's a matter of the coalition of the willing who want to fight this, and the time has come for us to be clear in our positions. You cannot straddle the fence. You are either on this side of the fence or on the other side of the fence. I am on the side of the fence that calls for solidarity with all peace-loving nations and populations who know that together they can bring stability and peace. And we know clearly who our enemies are. I hope the world understands that and clarifies clearly which side of the fence they stand today.
What can you tell us about Qatar and the Qataris here? Because here we have this so-called quiet agreement that the Biden administration claims it has made with the Qataris to freeze that money, the $6 billion temporarily. And yet we just heard Michael McCall say that, of course, all of this appeasement has led to this. But do you believe that the Qataris really would agree to hold money back from Iran?
Well, as far as I know, as of yesterday, the information that I had was that the Qataris had rejected the notion that the $6 billion was refrozen. So that's not the case. Therefore, it's 16 billion of money released to Iran, not to mention all the points that were made earlier about how much access Iran has to revenue, at least 90 billion. It's a little bit more that former Speaker McCarthy indicated. He mentioned, I think, 70 billion, but I think it's a little bit more than that, as well as the oil production and all those things. So that has gone unchecked. And therefore, I think that if you want to go to the specifics of this particular freezing of assets, it's really a drop in the ocean vis-a-vis so many other funds that the regime could have access to. And that's really in the big picture, the way that if the regime is getting fueled, they can therefore continue its campaign of supporting its proxies.
Of course.
Basically, we have paid for their mortgage, so obviously they're not going to spend it on the starving people of Iran. They're going to spend it, as I had called many times before, on funding their campaign abroad and, of course, their nuclear program at home.
Yes, and you've made this point before. We so appreciate your time this morning. Thank you, Crown Prince. Exiled Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, joining us this morning.